Hello, it's Paul Corenza here. I run the British Broadcasting Century podcast. So hello to you if you've listened to that. Hello, British Broadcasting Centurions. Let's say that. Whether or not you've heard it, I've been talking a little bit lately about who I think is Britain's first DJ of any gender, and that is Mrs. Donisthorpe, Mrs. Gertrude Donisthorpe, it turns out. I couldn't find her first name for a very long time until I asked on Twitter, and I was told she's called Gertrude. I was told by the curator of the Science Museum, Dr. Elizabeth Bruton, so thank you for that. And I wanted to introduce a couple of books, show my working a little bit, and I've got a special book I want to show you, so that's why I thought I'd do a little video thing. Firstly, where do I get the stuff about the Donisthorpes? Because it's not in the history books, really, apart from about 3, and I've got the 3 here. So I've got The Emergence of Broadcasting in Britain by Brian Hennessy. It's very comprehensive in there. We've got 2MT Riddle by our good friend of this parish, Tim Wonder. Hello, Tim, if you're watching. I know that sometimes you do. And the one that really got me sort of going on it was this one here, Leslie Bailey's BBC Scrapbooks Volume 2. Leslie Bailey put this show together back in the day called Scrapbook for whatever year. So Scrapbook for 1922 would revisit and relive lots of the events of that year. And he wrote this book, lovely book here, detailing many of the stories from that. Leslie Bailey says, when was the very first attempt made to broadcast sounds by wireless for the entertainment of others? One pioneer, doesn't say was the first, but one pioneer was Captain H.A. Donisthorpe, Horace Donisthorpe, later of the General Electric Company, attached in the 1914-18 war, World War One, you might call it, to an army wireless training centre, and his widow, Mrs. Donisthorpe, probably has the right to call herself the first woman broadcaster. Now, I've looked into it since there were probably a dozen or so cases in America of female broadcasters before, in the early 1910s, but certainly one of the first was Gertrude Donisthorpe, and I believe the first in Britain to play music, to play records in this country. In Scrapbook for 1917, his radio show, she said, my first broadcast was from a bell tent in a field near Worcester. My part in this experiment was strictly unofficial. I sat on a sugar box in front of a transmitter, which would now be considered a museum piece. I just don't know where that museum is. It had a bath of oil for cooling the one and only valve. At first, we simply had conversations between 2 stations about a mile apart. If I heard nothing, I would take my push bike and pedal to the other station, where I would often find my husband had got on his bike to my base by a different route. So she was playing stuff for him, and it goes on to say that she played gramophone records, introduced them via speech. And in Tim Wonder's book here, this is why I want to get to a new book I wanted to show you. Tim Wonder says, Donisthorpe, this is Horace Donisthorpe, continued as a radio amateur. And in mid-1922, he wrote a small booklet which he described as Everybody's Guide to Receiving Wireless News, Concerts and Messages. And I've got it here. I couldn't resist. I mentioned it on the podcast. You can find it, episode 23, I think it is. And we talk about the Donisthorpes. And I mentioned this booklet, and I had a look online. And if you go to abebooks.co.uk, there were a couple of copies there for about a tenner. It's not a big book, but it is, what have we got, 50 odd pages here. So I thought I'd just show you a little bit of this. In theory, it's from the middle of 1922. In practice, though, I think this version, I think he probably did do a version then. But I think he probably revisited it. Because you've got adverts galore, there we go, of the day. Wireless at home, everybody's guide to receiving wireless news, concerts and messages. Now, of course, if this were mid-1922, this would predate the BBC. This is when it's experimental radio messages going out. But actually, in this particular version, there's stuff, I'm dating it to about a year later. There's a sample radio license application just there. Because he mentions in here the different experimental stations from the BBC. Now he mentions, let's have a quick look. I'll talk you through different parts of the page. We've got a glossary here, elementary theory, lots of diagrams about how radio works, but really this is aimed at people who've never had radio at home and want to. So he gets quite detailed, it's quite complex here. But look, here we go. We've got the aerial system of 2LO London Broadcasting Station, courtesy of Marconi's Wireless Telegraph Company. That's the aerial there on the roof. That moved to Selfridges within about a year or so. Now there's some evidence here. I'm trying to date it to about the middle of 1923. He doesn't mention the Radio Times, which makes me think it's before September 1923 when the Radio Times came in. A simple receiving set with crystal detector. There you go. That's a nice little image of what you can expect of a radio of the day. What else have we got in here? Let's have another look. So this is written by Horace Donisthorpe. This is Gertrude Donisthorpe, in theory, the first DJ in Britain. Her husband Horace, who was the experimenter. He was there, the engineer, testing all this stuff out, getting her to broadcast these phrases. She would say, her test phrase was, "A wonderful bird is the pelican. Its beak can fit more than its belly can." And she would repeat that over and over again and then play a gramophone record. And eventually they would play songs for local troops as well. But yeah, Donisthorpe never joined the BBC, but as the BBC was launching, he was publishing books like this. Eventually joined Marconi's. Let's get to where the broadcasting station... Here we go, broadcasting. Page 32. The establishment of a broadcasting system is now complete, and the Postmaster General has granted licences to transmitting stations situated in the following centres: Aberdeen, Birmingham, Bournemouth, Cardiff, Glasgow, London, Manchester, Newcastle. The stations have a power not exceeding 1.5 kilowatts, should be good for reception for at least 150 miles around each particular centre. The wavelengths for the stations are as follows, and he lists them there. Now, the latest of those, I think, is Bournemouth. He mentions there 6BM Bournemouth was the BBC's station there, and that went online, so to speak, in middle of October 1923. So that's a conundrum, because the Radio Times would have launched by September 1923, but he doesn't mention the Radio Times in here. Bournemouth only launched October 1923. He implies it's up and running. He doesn't say it's going to happen soon. But so I reckon I'm going to date this book to around about September, October 23, maybe, because the Radio Times could have come in, but it hadn't. He just doesn't mention it. But it was very popular very quickly, so I would have thought he would mention that, especially towards the end here. He experimental wireless radio timetable. So that's the sort of thing there are adverts, of course, but there's no further mention of radio listings anywhere apart from things like that. Another thing I'll mention here, I'm going to keep looking through this, and if I find any further evidence of when it might be, loudspeakers, because of course, loudspeakers. Radio at the time was really for headphones, private listening. That was the way you heard it. It's odd to think that, isn't it? I'd always assumed that the loudspeaker came first, and then we developed headphones in time so you could listen to it privately. But no, the headphones came first. Earphones, as they would really call them, even though they're over the head. So it says here, loudspeakers. The employment of a loudspeaker is sometimes useful, as it enables more than one person to enjoy the radio signals, the signals being radiated from an arrangement looking similar to a gramophone horn. This loudspeaker can only be used when loud signals are available, and therefore is not suitable for use with crystal sets, which less reliable. You want a valve set, that's what you really want. With a suitable amplifier, a loudspeaker can well be made to give entertainment to a large audience during the period reserved for the broadcasting of wireless telephonic concerts. So concerts were sort of just coming in, 1923-ish. I'm still looking for further evidence of exactly when this book was written, but I thought it's a nice thing to have. It's not a big book. There's a couple of these out there if you fancy one for your collection, about a tenner or so. That was from Captain H. Donisthorpe. There you go. That's that title page again. Shows you a little bit about that there. But I'll keep looking, see if I can find any further info on that. So there you go. Tim Wonder's book. There you go. 2MT Riddle, The Birth of British Broadcasting. You can get that. If you also, while I'm here, let me plug his other big book. This is his new book. I think he's got a few left of this. From Marconi to Melba. That's a pretty bumper book. And loads of colour pictures throughout, that sort of thing. Maybe we'll look at that another time. Thank you for listening. Thank you for watching. The British Broadcasting Century podcast is available where podcasts are available, wherever you like to get your podcasts, really. So do subscribe, listen, and find us on Facebook and Twitter for more things like this.